Hello, my name is Jen, and I talk about all things related to academic writing. If you have been a subscriber to my channel for a while, let me first say sorry for not posting anything recently. And if you are new here, let me say welcome. Today, I wanted to just share a few thoughts with you about the rules of academic writing, or perhaps more aptly termed, the non-rules of academic writing. So what prompted this video was I've been working with a lot of high school students this past year, especially students in grade 9. And we've been writing a lot of essays together, and I often have students say to me things like, oh, no, I can't do that in an essay. And they might be referring to using the word I. Or they'll tell me, no, I can't start a sentence with the word and or but. And I'll, okay, and I nod. And then the ones that really get to me are the ones that have to do with structure. And they're like, no, I can't have an extra paragraph explaining that. I can only have 5 paragraphs. My teacher says I have to have 5 paragraphs. And I'm like, okay. And then they will say something like, and I need to have 3 points in each paragraph. I'm just like, okay, there's a lot of rules happening here. And so it got me thinking about these things that we call rules of academic writing. Here's what I want us to think about. I understand that when teachers mark essays that they follow a set of, like a rubric, right? And they want students to show that they have followed a set of instructions and that they've taken their specific instructions into consideration when they write. So when I'm helping a student write an essay and they come to me and they have all of these never do's, and must do's, I will always adhere to that because I want them to get the grade that they're working for, right? And so I will adhere to these lists. But I always make it very clear to my students that while these rules are being put in place or imposed on their writing assignment, their academic writing, that this is not the rule, that most academic writing does not conform to these kinds of rules. And so what I wanted to do today was take the rules that we've been taught and just kind of give you another way to think about them. So the first thing I want us to do is I want us to think about academic writing as not having a set of rules, but more as having a set of characteristics or commonalities, let's say. Things that it does do on a regular basis and things that it is less likely to do. So we're taking academic writing, and rather than saying it must do this, it must do this, it must do this, it never does this, never does this, never does this, we're putting the things that it does and doesn't do on a spectrum. And we're kind of saying, okay, well, using complete sentences, that's at, let's say, the end of the spectrum. That's pretty much always adhered to, quite often. Does that mean a academic piece of writing can never have a sentence fragment? No, it doesn't. It's not common. It might not be the norm, but it's certainly not a non-negotiable. And there are certainly plenty of published articles out there that use or have where authors use sentence fragments or start sentences with coordinating conjunctions like and or but, or even the word because. That can also be the first word of a sentence in a published article. So I think rather than saying academic writing does do this and doesn't do that, we want to think of it more like academic writing most often does this, but sometimes it does this, right? So we're putting it on a gradient. So I think that's the first thing we want to think about when we think of academic writing rules, that they're not black and white. They're not yes and no. They're more like, most often it does this, but occasionally we have this happening, okay? When we think about writing, academic writing that way, we kind of open ourselves up to a whole new way of thinking about academic writing, right? It becomes something that's a little bit, has more creativity in it. It becomes language that we can play with a little bit more. And it gives us the ability to kind of interact with it rather than feeling like we're trapped in a box and we have to be oh so formal and proper with like our tie tightened, and everything like that. We don't need to think of it like that. We can think of it that yes, it's formal, but within the formalities, it has personality, and it has, moments where it's not so formal. So I think that can be really helpful for us to think about writing and make it a little bit more approachable, that it's not necessarily this really pretentious, uptight style of writing, that there is room to play with the language, that there is room to infuse personality into your essays and into your reflections and your analytical reports, right? And so I think that's the biggest reason why we want to think about writing, academic writing, less as having a set of rules and more about having a set of common characteristics and putting those characteristics on a spectrum. Okay, so then let's talk about how we can begin to think about writing this way, right? And I think there are 3 things that we can do to help us be more playful in our academic writing, to explore language a little more, and to not impose these restrictions that limit our thinking, right? Because if I'm trying to think through an essay and my teacher has told me I have to have 3 points to back up my argument, and I only have, let's say I have 2, well, does that mean my argument's not valid? Or does that mean I don't have an argument because I don't have 3 points? Oh, that's not 3. 3 points, I only have 2? Absolutely not, right? When we put those restrictions or that impose a specific framework on students like that and our thinking, we're really doing ourselves a disservice and forcing ourselves to think in very narrow and specific ways. And that is certainly absolutely not what academic writing should do. Academic writing should ask questions. It should poke and probe, as Zora Neale Hurston would say, into ideas, and it should be curious to ask questions, and that kind of thinking is what good academic writing does, right? So there's my little tangent on why oftentimes imposing, especially these rigid structures on academic writing, doesn't help us to become better critical thinkers and writers. But there are 3 things, to go back, that we can do to help us be more creative and explorative in our writing. So the first one is that when we break an academic rule, or when we, let's say, venture closer to one end of the spectrum, like the non-common end of the spectrum of academic writing, like including a sentence fragment, or perhaps including an idiom, even though that might not be the norm in academic writing, if we are going to include or depart from, let's say, the norm and travel further down the spectrum, then we need to be intentional in doing so. This is especially true with grammar. So here's what I mean. If you're going to break a grammar rule, I love the occasional sentence fragment in an essay. I would say that if we are going to choose to do something that is less common in our writing, we need to be intentional and have a good reason for doing it. Otherwise, it looks like we just don't quite know what it is we're doing. We're not sure what the rules are, and we're just kind of winging it. So we need to kind of demonstrate within our writing that we know the rules, that we are aware of the rules, and that this is an intentional departure from the rule to draw attention to a point that we're making. So it doesn't become just, ooh, oops, how'd that sentence fragment get there? Ooh, I totally meant to do that. Because if we all know, if a paper is filled with fragment after fragment after fragment, a reader's not going to think, ooh, so avant-garde, so insightful. They're going to think, whoa, this is a mess, right? So if we are going to break or depart from conventional rules of grammar, we want to make sure we are doing it intentionally and that our reader is able to recognize it as intentional and not dismiss it as accidental. The second thing we can do to become more playful and creative in our writing is to know who we are writing for. Now, you might want to think of this like know your audience. I'm going to just flip it for a second because most often we are writing for a prof, right? For a specific course. So I'm going to say you need to know who you're writing for. I'll give you 2 examples. I had a prof in university. I took what was it called? Literary nonfiction. It was one of the courses I did in my master's program. And this specific prof, she really appreciated irony, and she studied sarcasm and humor and irony within literary nonfiction. And so she really valued that. And when I was writing my essay, I infused some of that within my writing and was highly rewarded for it because I knew who I was writing for. So she appreciated sarcasm and humor. Does that mean all of my profs appreciated sarcasm and humor in the essays that I wrote? No. But that's why I was selective. I knew where I could play more with language, where I could be a little bit more unconventional on the academic writing rule spectrum. And I could kind of play and be more creative in certain ways because I knew who I was writing for and her preferences. My second example would be in my postmodern lit class. I took a course on postmodern lit, and the postmodernists really enjoyed playing with narrative and the organization of narrative and the structuring of narrative. They oftentimes postmodernist texts have what we would say like fractured narratives. They don't read neatly from beginning to end. They're disrupted at times. And so for my class, for my prof for that class, when I would write an essay, I knew that I had a little bit more wiggle room in the organization of my essay and how I shared those ideas. I could kind of parallel how I was organizing my ideas to kind of mimic or reflect the coursework itself, and like the idea of the broken narrative or fragmented narrative. And my prof appreciated that. So I knew I had a little bit more wiggle room in my structure and form for that class. And so my essays became a little more influenced by who I was writing for there. So those are just two examples how when you know who you're writing for, and you can figure out what their preferences are, what your preferences are, I should say, relatively easily. You might want to read one or two of the articles they published, just skim through, look at how they use language and note, well, do they use fragments? Do they like rhetorical questions thrown in their essays? Maybe they do use the occasional slang or metaphor. You can make those observations and then you can see what they appreciate in their writing. Another way to figure out your prof's preferences are to look at the language used in the course syllabus or the writing assignments that they submit. Are they overly formal? Are they really strict on their rules? Like, how have they presented the material themselves? And you can kind of get a feel for how for their own like academic flavor, right? And so then that will kind of guide you and let you know how you can also play with your language and your organization. So that's the second thing I would say that we can do if we're going to take, let's say, academic liberties in our writing. So the first is to be intentional when you are going to depart from an academic normality, let's say, when you're going to travel or venture down the other end of the spectrum. Be intentional to do it and make sure you have demonstrated an understanding of how academia works and what you know about academic writing so that your departure looks intentional and your prof recognizes it as intentional and not simply accidental. The second one is to know who you're writing for. And the third point, to help us think about writing rules a little bit differently, is to remember that taking risks in your writing keeps you learning, right? And so we're always going to, it also keeps you interested, I would say, because it makes writing a little bit more fun. It takes the regimentedness out of it, right? So I like to think that when you are taking risks and when you have the ability to kind of stretch your interests and you are given a little bit more leeway with what you do and how you do it, you're going to enjoy writing that paper more, right? And anytime you enjoy writing something or enjoy doing something, you're going to put more effort into it and you're going to do a better job at it, right? Because it's what you like and it's something that you are kind of making your own. And so that would be the final thing, right? So when you take risks in your writing, you really open the door to see writing more as something that is personal, something more explorative, something that you can put your own little thumbprint on and make it yours, as opposed to feeling like it's this regimented, structured, uniform piece of writing that doesn't reflect you, that doesn't have any part of you in it, and that is more like a chore to write as opposed to something that you are interested in writing. So those are the 3 things I would recommend you do if you want to flex your writing rebel voice and kind of play with the academic rules and move up and down on the spectrum, rather than, feeling like you're stuck in a box and trapped in never do world and must do world. So that is it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you have a friend that's writing any papers in the next little while, be sure to share this with them. And I will see you next time.